Kim. I'm going to welcome all of you and thank you for attending. I hope we have some fun tonight. This is going to be a really relaxed kind of presentation. I've got a couple of disclaimers I want to throw out right away. The first one, people are interested in the story about the Arrowheads. The first disclaimer is, I'm not one person that goes out there and is scouring the countryside looking for arrowheads. I'm just the recipient of something handed down from a couple of generations. So that's the first one. The second one is that my presentation is going to be really relaxed. If you haven't had a chance to watch the presentation that Ward Voorhees did on the history of agriculture in Stevens County, go to the YouTube spot and find it. He did a sensational job. His was packed with data and statistics and things like that. You won't find any of that in this talk tonight. So another disclaimer is I'm ashamed that I have a picture of my grandfather with his family over there, and there's broken glass. And I hadn't decided whether I'm going to take that portrait out of there and put it into an album or take the back of it apart and put new glass in there. So accept it as it is over there. And you're welcome to go over and look at some of the family things over there, particularly the Arrowhead collection there. So, but we're going to talk, I have two objectives tonight. Number one is to share the story about how the Arrowheads were found, where they were found, and how they ended up with me. And I'll probably get you thinking a little bit about how come they're different sizes, and what were their particular uses, and why were they found where they were found, that kind of thing. And anything else related to it. I've talked to a couple people in the community and said, well, what tribe would might have been, or something like that. But we'll let that be some of the thought-provoking things that you may want to walk away with. The second thing is that when I talk about my family, it's a long history in Stevens County. And what I'm going to do is talk about the people before me. And I don't know that we ever had any serious arrests or anything, so I think that part's safe. But beyond that, it's not to elevate or glorify the Watzkes. It's to hopefully, instill something, evoke some memories of your own families that you can walk through some of those histories. Hopefully you have those, or you have nearness to it. My story is that it all happened here in Stevens County. So we'll use that, again, to get you thinking about your own folk. And that's really what I want to do tonight. I have one minor other objective we'll touch as we get done, but that's the nature of how we're going to go about this tonight. So we're going to begin with the Arrowhead story. And the story is going to be one that hopefully you're familiar with Stevens County and the location and all of that. So when we're talking about it, I'll probably have some side stories about the location, and maybe they're good, maybe they're humorous, maybe they're whatever, but please enjoy it. So the Arrowhead story is going to begin with the fact that these arrowheads were in fact found in Stevens County. And with the help of, and there are several people here who provided some critical information in putting this story together. Working with Bill Eckerson and Cam, using resources they had, this is a 1910 plot book of Stevens County. And uniquely, they colored the townships with different colors, so they stand out a little bit. So, looking at it here, this is Morris Township. That's the city of Morris in 1910, and all of them are there. You can see that the railroad is the prominent one. Any roads that you would have had would have been, well, 1910. What kind of roads would we have seen? But the railroad is the most significant thing that in the development of all of this country that we live in. The next slide is also a plot map of Swan Lake Township, 1910, again, out of the same atlas. So you can see, that there is ownership that's identified just like you'd find in a more contemporary version of the plot book. And you can see that the sections are numbered just like they are today in a plot book. Everything is the same, except this is 1910, not 2023. The next slide, whoops, excuse me, I hit the pointer instead of the The next slide is, this is out of a modern plot book. And the reason I'm using this one as part of the story is that the bodies of water are colored blue appropriately. Of course, Swan Lake Township is named because of that body of water, Swan Lake. And this is, well, they call it Winter's Slough or Upper Palm. This is what we know as Pomme de Terre Lake or Perkins Lake. And I'm going to come back to this for part of my story here, right there. That's going to have a little side story to it. But if you look at this, because it's blue, we'll use this one to do some identification. Today, this is housing along here. And of course, this is the access over here. And this would be Highway 59 right there. And this would be the hard pavement road as you leave Highway 59, and you would turn into either the residences or the park that's out there in the access. So that's what we need to do to get you oriented to this, how this story unfolds. The next slide you will see is we've blown up a section of that old plot book of just Swan Lake Township. And this is the name that is important right here. Whoops, I'm doing the wrong thing here. This is the name that's prominent. This is Henry Tiemann. And of course, this is an important name as well, although it's spelled differently. This is Zoll with an O, and it should be an A. So what we're going to talk about is that this gentleman somehow had his ownership of this land. And I don't know if a Tiemann married a Zoll or what, but Henry Tiemann is the one that owned this plot of land. At this particular time, this area right here is the residence of John and Wendy DeRung. And they were critical to gathering some of the pictures you're going to see in a moment. So the way this story is going to go is that there is a beach right here, and this is highlighted with red. And that's a stretch of land, and let me back up a second here. This is the river as it exits Pomme de Terre Lake, and today, and I'm assuming that it was there at that time, there is a spillway or check dam or whatever you would want to call it that holds the water back. I mean, the next dam down the line would have been established as the Mill Dam, which is the Mill Dam Road, and that had purpose for industry, for milling grain. But this was to keep the water at a level that would, well, was it for flood control or whatever reason? But it created what we call Pomme de Terre Lake. Now, we're going to see some pictures of that dam in a moment, but that's where that is. So Mr. Tiemann developed a beach there. And that beach, right there, he constructed 2 bathhouses. And they're very close together, parallel to the lake, very short sidewalks. And my first vision of them long ago is those short sidewalks had one step down on top of the rocks. It's very rocky there, as you will see in a moment. And one of these was for the boys changing, and one was for the girls changing. And working with Cam and Bill in their research, they could not find anything in any records within the museum here that it was an official beach. So I went to my favorite source on this, Gladys Hendricks, who was sitting in the front row here. She grew up in this area. This is where Gladys grew up, in this area. This is stork ground up in here today, back then as well. But Gladys told me, no, she doesn't remember it was really an official beach. Well, what was it used for? Her best description of it was used for celebrations. So somebody wanted to do it. That's pretty nice that somebody would build bathhouses and have a beach there for others to use. And what? Just for celebrations or something of that order. So what happened with his story is that my grandfather, his name is Henry, he was a young lad, and I regret that one of the pictures my dad showed me one time was my grandpa was standing near water, whether it was here or out at the river here, but he had shorts on, no shirt, And my dad says, he was a well-built little guy, wasn't he? And I said, yeah, he was, kind of, you know. So, and the importance of me telling you that is that very likely that would have been the age when he discovered these arrowheads. So he was born in 1898, so I'm going to make him a young teenager, 12, 13, and I know I'm going to show you a picture of him in the Army in World War I. Now, he would have been, at the end of World War I, he would have only been, 17, 18, 19 years old. So as a young teenager, I'm suspecting these arrowheads were probably found somewhere around 1910, 11, something like that, making him 12 or 13 years old. So I wish I had that picture, but I do not have it. So anyway, that is where the location of these arrowheads were found. And what happened was, he was out there swimming, and that particular day, he was bored. Now, this is all stories told to me. And he went over and he found a tree and sat down by himself. And he sat there for a minute. He said, this is really uncomfortable back here. What in the world is this? So he turned around and he saw that hunk of turf, and he scratched on it. And lo and behold, the soil moved away, and here was a deteriorating pouch of arrowheads. So he kept digging until he found the very last one, and they are in that frame over there that you can go and look at in a little bit. What he did with them was he just hung on to them. He didn't do anything special with them. So anyway, we're gonna look next at perhaps where he found them, and we're gonna look at the site. This is what Cam and Bill located. That it does say in this obituary that Henry Tiemann farmed along, in Swan Lake, farmed along Pomme de Terre Lake, and the farm was on Pomme de Terre Lake. So that gives that ownership credibility. This is what remains of the spillway dam. Now, I grew up around Morris, and I had some Boy Scout time, and I'll mention that in a moment again, but this is the dam that holds back the water for the Pomme de Terre River. If you look over here, you can see the remnants of the concrete pad and some railings, and I'll show you, I'll go to it now. Here's the railing on this side where we took the picture. This is the river exiting and going south downstream out of Pomme de Terre Lake. But when I was much, much younger, if you climbed over the railing on either side of the river, on top of this dam was a catwalk. And you could walk all the way across to the other side. So as a young boy, Boy Scout age, doing things out there, I did that several times. And when Cam and I walked out there a couple of weeks ago to get some pictures of this site, well, initially, Cam, Darren, Patty, and I went there before the 4th of July. We made an adventure to go out there one evening. And I said, we can just walk down the shoreline. Here's the public access down here. We can just walk down the shoreline. Well, it's much developed from the last time you could walk down the shoreline. There are many, many, many more houses in there now. But we did walk down there, and the walk through the woods was very short compared to what it was before. We got there, and none of us was really excited about taking our shoes off. I said, well, we can walk across the catwalk. No, there isn't any catwalk there anymore. Nobody said we're going to take our shoes off. I know it isn't that deep there. I know it isn't. And I think it's actually a very firm sandy bottom. But we didn't do that. So then my next step was, I know whose land it is by this story, and it belongs to John and Wendy Durung. And so I called up John. I said, this is what I'm doing at the museum, and I need to have access and walk down there. Oh, sure. He said, well, it's the 4th of July is coming up, and every year my kids come home, and I take the mower down there, and we mow the path, and we build a fire down there. So I'll do that before you get there. And he did. And so a couple of weeks ago, Cam and I said, well, let's go out there and see if we can take some pictures. So we did that. And the funny part of it is probably the last time that I walked down there was I played men's hockey in Alexandria. We had a bunch of college kids, and we had some hockey players from Morris. And the Sharstrom family had an A-frame. It was the last developed property before the woods. And that must have been about, I don't know, it must have been in the mid-'80s or something like that, mid to late '80s. And after the season, we'd go out there and have brats and have a little get-together and build a fire. And I told some of these players, especially the college kids, come on with me, we'll walk down, I'll show you something. And we walked down there and we walked across the catwalk. But it's been such a long time, I kept telling Cam that, you know, if we get down, if we can cross this, those pads are only 25 steps up past the other side of the dam. Well, we came at it when we went out to take the pictures, and we found it's 100 yards. It's not 25 steps. So we'll continue on now. So that's the river exiting, and that's this would be the north side of the dam, the railing, and all of that. Okay, so we're back to that. We're going to go on now from here. We've established where the arrowheads were found on that beach. Let's go here. So this is a shot of one of the pads. You'll see several of these now. Unfortunately, it's very overgrown with moss and a lot of dirt over the years. But this is the corner of that. These pads are, again, they're about 16 feet deep, going from the shoreline to the back of the structure, and they're about 12 feet across. And they have this little narrow sidewalk runs maybe 20 feet to the water. Okay. Here's a different angle. There's two of them, so this looks like it would be the one more northerly one. This is the front corner of it you see right here. That's all moss on it, and the back of it would be right about there. This is a different angle of one of them. This would be the sidewalk coming out, going toward the lake. This is a longer shot of it. Actually, this shot is, we're looking south right now. This is the corner of the more northerly structure. Whoops, I didn't do that right. Let's go back up. This is the corner of the more northerly structure, ending about, I don't know, somewhere in there. This is the one you'd see on the south end of it. This is the trail you would take on down about 100 yards to get back down to that dam. I'm standing on the edge of one there. This is the front edge of it. And I'll show you some other shots here. This is one of the sidewalks going out to the lake itself. I'm a little perplexed because what I told you, it doesn't look like the concrete step, the one step down, would have been over that rock. So that part kind of threw me a little bit. The next one will be a little better. That's the same one. You can see the sidewalk coming back to the bathhouse. This is very overgrown now. You can imagine back then when it was in use, you know, that tree, and it was probably much more wide open. This is standing on the rock and looking back up. Now this is, to me, is proof. This is not the one with the big rock you saw. This is the second one. This is the proof that our steps are broken off right there. So the water is right here. Okay, a couple more shots. That's the one with the broken tip. And those are the arrowheads. Now, again, I don't know for sure what tribe, what party this property belongs to. Cam said they have some record some information that at times the Palm de Terre served as the dividing line for hunting grounds between the Chippewa and the Dakota. You know, but talking to Jason here, you know, I think there's history that was always a migrating boundary between those tribes. But you know, that's maybe part of the story. But at any rate, we don't know whose they are. I'm always intrigued about the size of these arrowheads, from those to those. Second thing that runs through my head all the time is, if I'm a craftsman making arrowheads, how many did I break before it finally worked, you know? how deft were they when they did that? Bodies of water had to have been extremely important to our Native Americans and their existence, whether it was hunting or water for whatever purposes they needed it for. But that's where they were found, and my grandfather found them as a young man, and he became an optometrist later on, and he didn't do anything with them but had them in a medicine bottle. And after that, he just had them that way. He passed away at age 63 in 1961, at which time my dad was in practice of optometry with him, and there are two other brothers. My dad has two brothers, one in California and one in Arizona, and I don't know that they knew they still existed or weren't worried about it. And, it was out of sight, out of mind, so they just ended up with my dad. And what he did was he kept them in the medicine bottle, a little plastic medicine bottle. And like all of us guys, we have, maybe our top dresser drawer has a little box in the corner where we've got old glasses and tie tacks and things like that. And that's where they sat for a long, long time. And then what happened was one day, Papa John's, what's that doing in there? One day, he woke up probably around early 70s, and he got out of bed, and something struck him, and he says, I need to share these with the world. So he didn't know what to do, but he said, I know what I'll do. I'll go talk to a guy who can take care of this problem. So we talked to Doug Garbrick. How many people in this room remember Doug Garbrick? Doug Garbrick had a photo shop right here. And then it became Papa John's. Now, I asked the Cam and Bill if they could find a picture of it showing Garbrick Studio. They couldn't, but we did come up with the building. So back to the Arrowheads. So that's what he did, and the frame, 1970s, I don't know. I guess that's contemporary for 1970, I don't know. But what he did is he took it to Doug, and Doug laid them out and did that. And they did craftsman-wise, he did a very good job. I just chuckle about the style of the framing. But at any rate, what my father did was he hung them in the hallway of his office on East 6th Street, and they hung there for years. Ultimately, he retired, but he sold the practice to Dr. Lair, and he took them home. And then he and my mother went on an adventure and moved to Wilmer, Minnesota. And they went to Wilmer, and they hung in the garage. So I don't know how many people in Wilmer got to know the story about it, but that's where they were. And I have had an office with New York Life in my home for a few years, and then I moved to downtown, and I was on top of the old Citizens Bank building. And it was probably in the late 90s, and unannounced, my dad walked in the door and said, are you in here? I said, yeah. He said, I got something for you. And I walked over and he said, these belong in Morris. So they've been in my office ever since. And the only reason I'm doing this tonight is because Ward Voorhees came in to talk to me one time, and he saw them. He said, oh, those are really great. You got to share that with people. And I said, oh, okay. Well, then he whispered in Cam's ear, and Cam says, Paul, I hear you have some more arrowheads. Yeah, I do. So that's how I got to come here tonight. Now, again, I want you to think about it as something that's rich for Stevens County. It's all about getting you thinking about, others have found arrowheads. I know Jason said you found one time, and I've heard somebody else has quite a collection they found. And again, that person has proximity to Palm de Terre Lake. But that's where these were found, and that's how they ended up with me. But to me, it's more important that you think about the history of Stevens County and what that was and where it came from and why, and why are they different sizes and how were they used and all kinds of things like that. But that's out there. It's all out there. Any questions about that, or interested, curious things you'd like to ask? And then we'll go on to part 2 in a minute here. But anything at all? Yes, Del.
That house is in the sidewalk to the lake, into the rocks. There was no beach there at any time, so people would just climb across the rocks and go into the water?
When I talked to Gladys about this, she said one of the first things she said was it was very rocky there. Well, if you're a young kid, you may think it's kind of cool to crawl over rocks too. I don't know. And why he chose that location, you know, but that's what was there. So let's go back up to that again. Now, this is my best quick sketch for Bill the other day, and I tried to do it as best scale as I've told you that these are 16 feet deep, and they're 12 feet wide, the pads are, and I think it's about 20 feet of sidewalk between them. And I do remember from my seeing it many years ago that it was at the end of the sidewalk, there was one concrete step, and then it was either on top of the rocks. I don't think as I recall, the steps did not get down to the water. But, yeah. But it's incredible that if it's not something known as a public beach, that it's maybe something just for celebrations, as I learned, that somebody would go to that extent to build a wooden structure and have a door on it for privacy and probably some hooks to hang your clothes and the whole thing. But that's where that is. And well, let's talk a little bit more about Palmetier Lake, and then I can answer more questions. Yes?
Just a comment. This connects with Ward a little bit, but I used to work with Ward, and a fellow used to work with me, Dean Peterson. We'd go out to Swan Lake Research Park. Let me backtrack for a second. I don't know anything about arrowheads, but as we would be walking around the plowed fields at the Swan Lake Research Park, Dean would find arrowheads all the time. I never found one, and we'd be walking abreast of one another. He found them all the time. So what that tells me is, with what your comments about the several arrowheads at Palmetier, maybe this area was a very common place for Native Americans to meet.
Hunt?
Live, yeah.
Yep.
Much more than I would have expected.
Yep, very good. You know, and it's interesting. I have a granddaughter who lives on a lake, agate lake, up by the Brainerd area. Her older sister can't see an agate anywhere down by the water. The younger one can see them just like that. So, you know, maybe a talent and an innate thing. I want to go back up here just a second. I want to get to this one. Okay. I only brought one prop along because it's a good story here. What Gladys told me as well is this was the area of Tiemann's Beach that we talked about. She said, of course, the Storks then created one called, they didn't call it anything, but they constructed or developed a beach for their family or others. Of course, over on this side, you have what would be Perkins, the old roller rink, now known as West Palm. And of course, down here, you've got the access and a bit of a park. You can actually camp in there now if you want to. So, I mean, it's been recreational in many ways for a long time. Now, I had to consult Del Sarlett this morning because I had the numbers, but I just wanted to make sure I had them in the right order. A change in times. When I was young, when I was a boy, my family has always been a member of the Federated Church. The Federated Church had its own scouting unit. Assumption had its own scouting unit. And First Lutheran had its own scouting unit. So Del informs me that first was 469, no, other way around, 467, and Assumption was 468, and we were 469. So through that Boy Scout Association, Bob DeWall had boys older than I, and somehow they had access to what we call the island. And I don't know if it's really an island. It looks like an island here, and it was an island to us. So we left going out of where Perkins is in little fishing boats, motored out there, and we camped on this point or island. And there was basically a clearing enough to get the boats up to shore, and then it became more wooded. And we threw tents up there, and we camped there a couple of times. And I took the family hand axe out there. And this was always in my dad's wooden workbench, or I should say tool chest, that he probably made in high school. And he had saws were perfectly in there, and had sliding wooden shelves, and this was always at the bottom. Of course, this was an important tool to take out camping. You got to be chopping something out there, right? So we camped there that weekend, and we came home, and you know how things go. Sometimes Dad says, you know, because his kids never put tools back where they should all the time, as most kids wouldn't. He said, I'm missing the axe, the hand axe. Where is that? And I didn't say a word. This is my George Washington moment here. I didn't say a word, and I just kept looking the other way, and none of my brothers owned up to it. I knew exactly where it was. We left it out there. So my father got by with whatever he had to do that day without the axe, and I kept my mouth shut until we had a chance to go back out there next year. And I brought it back home quietly. But again, maybe the importance of the story is to share that all of this has been, in a way, recreational way back. And let's say when my grandfather found that at Tiemann's Beach was, you know, 1910, 1911, something like that. So the usage in Stevens County, Palm de Terre Lake, had recreational use. I'll take some more questions if you have any. Yes?
Were you turned to go into the access to Palm de Terre, section 30 or 31? As you make the left-hand turn to go into the park area, on the opposite side of the road, there's kind of a hill there. It's farmland. The story goes that there used to be an Indian burial ground there, because the farmers supposedly had turned up a lot of bones over the years cultivating that land. And if that's true, that fits in with your story about the Palm de Terre River supposedly being the borderline between the two Native American tribes. You can envision
Perhaps.
battles across the river, and be a natural place to find a lot of arrowheads.
Yeah. Yeah. These were, who knows what tree my grandfather sat down and, you know, discovered those, but you know, Cam could tell you too, if you go down this trail, if you would ask permission of John DeRung to go see this, or if you would access it from the water, it is quite overgrown with trees. It perhaps was much more wide open back then, and trying to pick out a tree where Grandpa might have found those, no, not gonna happen. So, more questions about that, and then we'll kind of dance on.
You said they found them in a pouch?
A leather pouch that was deteriorating as he was scratching it away.
So there was no saving the pouch, and you've never seen the pouch?
No. All I saw was a plastic bottle. But I would agree with Frank that I bet around this lake, if you that was your archaeological intention, you probably could find lots of things, perhaps more arrowheads. So. But that's the story of Palm de Terre Lake and the bathhouses of something called Tiemmann Beach. And please enjoy, there's other things I'm going to talk about over there, but that's the Arrowhead collection, and they'll go back in my wall for a while in the office, and others can come in. And one of the important people that came in and saw those initially when I was not, my office was someplace else, was Bill Stork. And he and his son have always had a fire extinguisher recharging business. And the fire extinguisher in my office hadn't been charged. I think the tag on it was like 15 years prior or something. And somehow he had that building. He said, I got the job, I'm supposed to check all of these. And he came in and looked at that. That's got to get recharged or replaced. And he turned around and he saw those arrowheads. What's that? And when I told him where they came from, his eyes opened wide open, because, you know, north of where we're talking about, this is Stork land. And so he's got a history up there, and, you know, again, maybe more arrowheads could be found there. Yes.
The arrowheads that you have, and I've seen them in your office, they're different colors.
Yep.
Do you know what kind of stone it is? Is the geologist ever looked at it, or?
I haven't had a geologist look at it, but you know, that would be very interesting. Again,
They're all different colors,
Yeah.
they're not the same stone, I
Yeah.
don't think.
Different sizes.
Yeah.
The first thought that I always have is how many mistakes before they actually succeeded on one. Okay, should we go on? Well, we'll dance through these. You want me to, is there any questions on any of these slides about the dam or anything? I really wish I had one where they had the catwalk on top. Okay, we're gonna go on. Okay, Cam asked me to share some stories about my family. Again, this isn't to elevate our image or anything like that. This is just to tell you, I will tell you something important to me is that at this juncture, this point in time, these are, I'm at generation number 5 on that list. We have generation 6 sitting in the room. 7 and 8 are in Morris as well, so. This is my great-grandfather, and he was a blacksmith in Morris, and this is an ad out of an old Morris newspaper. I have no idea what year it is. It's over there, it's on the table, it's framed, and the only reason I have it is that Ed Dablow was a gentleman that was a contemporary, a very good friend of my grandpa Henry. And his son is named Ed Dablow Jr. And Ed Dablow and my grandfather were friends. They must have gone in on the buddy system in World War I, and they were in training in Carlsbad in the desert in New Mexico, and I have some pictures of that. But Ed came into my office one time a few years back, and he had a question about a little New York Life policy that was purchased long, long ago. And then he said, I should talk to you sometime. I said, oh yeah? He said, I've got something for you. Oh yeah? And a couple weeks later, he came in with this frame thing over there that you'll see. And this is just the ad in the corner. These are a listing of delinquent taxpayers. And most of them are in Horton Township, and both of his grandparents were delinquent in tax listings. So they saved that, and then they framed it over there, and he said, I don't need this anymore because you need this ad. So he gave it to me. And then he came back a couple weeks later, and he gave me a couple pictures of my grandfather and Ed Dablow in training in Carlsbad, New Mexico. But that was my great-grandfather, Antone Jr. We'll go back up one here. So let's start in here. I don't know exactly when Antone Sr. Came to Stevens County, but that's, all 4 of these are buried in the Summit Cemetery. And so Cam and I went and did the research, or we took the pictures out at the Palmetier Lake, and she was asking questions. Okay, come on, we'll just go to the cemetery. So we got out, and I showed her 2 locations where these 2 are buried, and then this is the newer part of the Watzke burial area. And so let's just make an assumption here that if Antone Jr. was born in '59, let's say that Antone Sr. was 25 years old when he came to Morris, Minnesota. I don't know, but I'm going to use that. So that gives you some perspective. I don't really know. I think there's some Watzke history written someplace that I can't put my hands on right now. I don't know what he did for a living. Antone Jr. was the blacksmith. Antone Jr. also had some other notoriety in Morris that they've done a historic music display at the museum here, highlighting different orchestras in all of the communities. And Antone, this is a weird combination. Now, he's a blacksmith by profession, but he also led the Watzke Orchestra, and he has the Watzke Boys Band, and we'll show you a picture of that in a minute. So I've never figured out how he could be pounding hammers and be so. And so that's Antone Sr. This is Antone Jr. This is my grandfather. Again, I used his date of birth because the story is he found those arrowheads when he was a young teenager. And I was only 11 years old when he passed away. Here's my dad, born in 25, and he lived to be age 83 and passed away in 2008. And here I'm this guy. Okay, we'll go on. That's the blacksmith shop. And Antone, yes.
Notice how the Z in your last name is backwards.
Yeah. They hired a poor painter. It's always been a Z.
Paul, where was this in relationship to current Morris?
I think it sits where Don's and that stretch is. If it's not that location, it's over where the city center parking area is. This is the south side of the building. This is the sunny side of the building. Okay? This is Antone right here. There's a clicker. There's a laser. This is Antone. This is his wife right here. That's the family. This is Henry. So he was, like my dad said, he was well built for a little guy. There's the boys' band, and of course, here's Antone in the back, and this little drummer boy is Henry. And these are boys. I think there's some other Watzkes in there, you know, but Henry's, a couple of his siblings might be in there. But if they could go back and look at the thing they ran a while back about the bands and the orchestras of Morris and Stevens County, this is a big deal. I mean, this wasn't the only boys band around. It was certainly there. Every other towns had boys bands and had orchestras. And Bill tells me that looks like FDR if we put wire rim glasses on it. This is Antone at an older age, and this is my father at, well, somewhere around a year, something like that. This is Henry, dressed up. That's Antone. This is the backyard. I'll show you the house. That's the back of the house, my grandpa and grandma's house. I don't know who these, a couple of these kids are, the taller ones. This is my dad. This is one of my uncles. Yeah. Now, my folks didn't dress me like that at that age. And I didn't dress my three boys like that at that age, but that's my grandpa. That's Henry in World War II garb. That's Henry and Ruth. That's my grandparents at middle age. Patty remembers this. This is a really good grandma. She was a lot of fun. That's Ruth. You probably know this house. You've probably seen this house. This is the house my grandfather built. To my recollection, his first optometric office was above a building, well, some of you might remember it, where Varnum's Hardware was located. I think the Morris next to Sarlet's Music. I think my grandfather's first office was up there. What I remember of my grandfather and my dad coming back to practice with him, the office was up in the upper corner above the old Citizens Bank building. So when I moved my New York Life office from my home to downtown, that's where I went as well. This house right here is located at, the address would be 100 East 5th Street. So looking directly across 5th Street, you'd see the south end of the library. This is, I'll show you, I want you to keep in mind the width of this house, okay? This is the back side of the house, and this is the dining room, and that's the kitchen, and there's a little tiny breakfast nook nailed against the wall. This is a bedroom and a bathroom upstairs. And it had a concrete basement of the same dimension underneath it. I don't know what that year of that optometric office is, because when I was a little guy, it had much more modern devices. But this may have been just one station in the optometric office at one time. Wish there were a date on the back of the picture, but there wasn't. This is Henry, again, my grandfather. This is out at the Pomme de Terre golf course, and that's a crew member out at the golf course. As the Depression rolled in, the golf course was going to go under. And I don't know why my grandfather and grandmother decided, but they decided that they had to save it, and so they purchased it. And in addition to being an optometrist, the family ran the golf course. And they actually raised chickens. They had a little coop or a barn up there, and they raised chickens, and they had a garden where they grew some potatoes and carrots. And once a week they'd serve chicken and potatoes and whatever. But it drove them crazy because it took a lot of work, and my grandfather ended up selling it back to a group of stockholders. Now we've had many gyrations since then of different kinds of ownership, but it was to save it during it going into the Depression. Their claim to fame is they took it from sand greens to grass greens. And there are a couple holes out in this course yet today that have postage size greens. They're very small. And so taking them from sand greens to grass green may not be as difficult of a task as it might seem when you first hear that. But how do you do that was the better part. So my dad and my grandpa and grandma and my dad and his two brothers, they would lay a plank down, and then they'd get down on their knees and they'd plant one sprig of bent grass at a time. And then after they'd do several rows, and then they'd move the board. So that's why the greens are only so big. My grandpa much preferred to fish, and so I regret he died when I was only 11 years old. I only got to fish with him a couple times. It would have been really, really fun to have had more opportunity. In my office at home, I've got a picture, and the names on the back are the other guys. They came to they took my grandfather to Canada fishing, and the picture is a boat turned over with a crude outboard motor hanging on the back, and they had many big northerns laying as slabs on top of this boat. And it was my grandfather and a couple different optical salespeople. But I still have one of his ancient steel rods that's real short, but it's a treasure.
Paul, I have a question about that photo. Does he have a tie on?
Oh, yeah.
Did he go fishing with the tie on?
You know, he could have gone to a Twins game, but in the middle of the day, but it was a nice northern, though. Yeah, you have to look at it. Even this is a shot of this is my dad. This is my dad. This is my Uncle Bob. This is my Uncle Bill. I don't know who these two guys are. They're not, but I believe this is Lake Minnewaska. You can tell by the high shoreline over there and a formal dock, and it looks like a bigger body of water. And one of the times I did go fishing with my grandfather, we went to, we rented a boat from a resort, and we went out and fished for the afternoon, and we caught a boatload of perch. And I remember laying them all out, and then he taught me how to clean them really fast. So I wish I had more time with that. I wish I had more occasions with him with that. These are some pictures of my dad. Dad with one of his brothers. This is the my grandma had a tremendous garden in that backyard, and the sidewalk was on the east side of it, and this trellis was part of it. This is my dad and a brother. This is when my dad graduated from high school, and this is my Uncle Bob and my Uncle Bill. They all played football. They're all pretty good. This is the one I want you to remember, the width of the house, the front of the house. This is my dad here, and I can't see it well enough. That's my dad, that's Uncle Bob. when I was a little kid and they lived in that house, I thought that it was a big living room. I thought it was really a big living room. You know, imagine this. People can identify with this. One thing that I always remember hearing was my grandpa saying, "Oh, it's in the front room." And even my dad made slips of that. Now, I didn't live in a house. When I left home, my folks had a living room and they had a family area in the basement. And today you'd have a den or you'd have a family area, you'd have a fixed up basement. But back then, in those small houses, you were limited. Well, I can see some large family people here. People had many children. But all the kids, when they were going to play, well, they played in the front room. Well, that was where you had your sofas and chairs, and that's it. And back then, of course, there wasn't a television set or anything like that, that perhaps, so maybe a big radio thing that you had you could listen to, but you played in the front room or the living room. So, but it's not very big. It was, if you go back and see that picture. This is my dad. He's going off to college, and this is my grandma looking cheerfully at him. And that is his two brothers. They were 2.5 years apart in age. Here he is in the Army. He ended up in he ended up in Galesburg, Illinois, as the war was going on. He wanted to be a pilot, but his vision was so bad they made him a navigator. Here he is coming home for a visit with Uncle Bob. Here he is with my grandma. And this, some of you may know this person. This was my dad's best friend. His name is Gordon or Gordy Johnson. And Gordy, when I knew him, had our own hardware store. And that location is where the setback part of Bella Cucina, or where Stone's Throw is today. So that was a hardware store. And that was my dad's very best friend. He died relatively young, but they were in the Army about the same time as everyone was. My dad was a good athlete. I'll go back up here for a second. He's not in a uniform. He'd graduated. And because his intent was to go into optometry, my grandfather encouraged him after graduation, that's why Grandma had that tear in her eye, to get down to main campus and get started. Get started, you got to get going. And so he went off right after high school and started at main campus. Well, World War II was going on, and they needed bodies for the Gopher football team. And so some coach, not the head coach, got wind of, oh, this was a pretty good football player out in western Minnesota. And he tried to talk him into playing. And he thought it over, and of course he consulted with Grandpa. No, you got to study, keep at it, keep at it. So he didn't do that. And my dad had a really late birthday. So his birthday was November 30th, and he went to his university post office box, and there in his post office box was his draft notice. So you're out, you're done with school right then. And so later on in life he says, you know, I always regret that I never tried. And then he'd come to his senses and say, but I didn't break any fingers, I can walk straight, and all that. So he's grateful he didn't do that. Just a couple more pictures here. I don't know exactly, I think this was maybe when he came home after the war, this one right here, before he went on to optometric school. This is at optometric school. My mother could tell me if she were alive who his best friend was in optometric school was, but that's what that is. I think we're coming to the end here. Dad was a good golfer. He even had that leather bag when I first started looking at the golf world. That's his wedding picture with my mother, Dorothy. And this is the last really good picture in 1995 it shows in the corner. And the last one I'm going to show you is the Federated Church. That's where the Watzkes had always been, and there happened to be one of those in the photo album. So just to bring you back to Morris and show you that. So.
Is that the current site of the Federated Church?
No, this is where Faith Lutheran is today. The Federated Church that exists today has a cornerstone Oh boy, I can't tell you what we saved the one from this church. We also mounted that in one of the parts of the entry. This one is the new cornerstone that was established in the new church is 1974. So this was left behind in 74. Now again, I want to tell you the importance is not anything more than to get you thinking about your own family. I just happen to have the unique situation that, you know, the Watzkes have been in this area for a long, long time. And special to me, I have to be careful with this, and my wife, we both come from the same story. We come from the story that we have generations that have handed down good things to us. So she grew up in Hoffman and has the same story. She's got lots of heritage there. Plus, she's got a much bigger extended family. But that's the value to me, is what we receive from that. So that's my story, and I'd sure answer any questions if you'd like. Yes?
Where did your great-great-grandfather come from? What's the ancestry of Watzke?
Patty bought me a DNA thing, Ancestry.com, and then I lost the dang thing, and I just found it the other day. So the Watzke name comes from a migrating part of the world in Europe. It's the German, Polish, Czechoslovakian border area. Okay? But when you look at my DNA, because of my grandma Ruth, I'm mostly Scot and the British Isle area. But there's some Norwegian, just like you'd find in other peoples as well. But yeah. So the timing on that is my great-grandfather, yeah, we'll see, we'll go back up to that slide, okay? The first story I know is that he came from Black River Falls, Wisconsin. Now, I think he's got to be the immigrant in my book. And beyond that, when did he come to Morris? Again, I'm going to say that because he was born in 59, that let's say Anton Jr. was born when Anton Sr. was 25. That's how I'm going to do it. You know, they're pretty long-living people. Grandpa had developed cancer, and that was a little more sudden, but yeah. Hope it just triggers all kinds of things that you can walk back in your own family with, too. Questions? Please.
Well, another comment is that, probably because Jessica was telling me that you're going to have this lecture about arrowheads today, for whatever reason.
This isn't a lecture, this is a conversation.
For whatever reason, I was laying in bed the other day, I was thinking about arrowheads, not something normal. And then there was an article in the paper about some guy in the Alps in the 5,000-year-old body.
Yeah.
Found in the glacier 30 years ago, but they were just reanalyzing the guy recently. And he was killed by he had an arrow in his back.
Mm.
And he got 5,000 years ago, killed by an arrow. It got me thinking about
Yeah.
invented the bow and arrow. And that's an engineering feat that, I couldn't think of that. And how they come up with that idea, it's fantastic. It's meant to kill things, I know, but it's, other than that, it's a really fantastic idea.
And it's a weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could have been a spear. They said,
And one thing that I had Jim Halby contact me when it was announced I was going to do this, and he said, "Paul, I'm going to help you out." I said, "Okay, how?" He said, "I'm going to help you fill your time." I said, "Well, that's good." I said, "Well, how are you going to do that?" Well, I got a hold of Gary Wagner, and his brother John collects arrowheads. And he says, "I'm going to get a hold of him." And sadly, brother John would be a year older than I am. He had a successful career in law enforcement. I think he was the police chief in Fergus Falls. He's battling cancer and very sick. But he has found arrowheads, Greg, on Wagner land and other places. So it's out there, Again, I hope I didn't bore you, anything like that. I hope I stimulated you to have some good thoughts about your own family.